Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on being a better mental health advocate at home and at work. It's not common that we hear about mental health advocacy, and even less so when it comes to what we can do as individuals with our social relationships. So this sharing will help you understand more about advocacy and how you can start on your journey as a mental health advocate from within and in your immediate surroundings. So let's get started. A quick question to all of you. What do you know about mental health advocacy or even just advocacy? Have you been to a protest? Have you gone on a strike? Have you stood up for someone? Have you just talked about mental health before? Are any or all of these actually considered advocacy? Well, the truth is, these are all forms of advocacy. It may be as simple as listening with empathy to a colleague at work or telling your parents about your therapy experience. So take a moment to think about that. You may have been advocating subconsciously without even realizing it. So I would like to introduce you to what I will be sharing about today. We will start off with a brief introduction to advocacy and dive into what mental health advocacy means. Then I will bring you through a process of starting your own journey of mental health advocacy through 3 levels of change, and finally to address how you can be an even better advocate for mental health by fighting for yourself too. Let's get started. I'd like to bring us back to my earlier question. What do you know about advocacy? Advocacy is a concept, activity, or choice by an individual or a group of people to bring about change within political, economic, and social institutions in their communities or their nations. Some examples of advocacy would be campaigns and protests to increase awareness of a cause such as equal rights for pay, signing petitions or emailing the member of parliament in your region for changes, or even a new form of social media advocacy to spread awareness, information, and rally people to your cause through huge platforms such as Instagram and Facebook. The outcome of advocacy is to bring a change to current beliefs and structures around us. So with that in mind, what is mental health advocacy? There is a quote I like from the World Health Organization that perfectly sums up what mental health advocacy is. A concept to influence change in major structural and attitudinal barriers to achieving positive mental health outcomes in populations. Let's dive a bit deeper. Positive mental health outcomes include accessible and affordable support and services for everyone, lower numbers of mental health disorders or crisis and suicide cases, and even overall reduction of stigma affecting individuals with mental health issues such as employability, renting an apartment, and early intervention because more people are already aware of mental health issues and symptoms. So to reach these outcomes, we need to make a difference in the current attitudes towards mental health and the current lack of infrastructure that supports mental health services as a right for every individual, not just those who can afford it. So then, what is a mental health advocate? Based on the description of mental health advocacy, it is an individual or someone who actively tries to influence change in the mental health stigmas and barriers in their own communities and beyond. A mental health advocate is also someone who stands up for others and fights for the rights of people with mental health issues when they cannot do it themselves or when they just need some backup. A mental health advocate is a friend, a defender, a supporter, and an amplifier, and more is always better in this case. The louder the voice, the more likely it is heard when it comes to advocacy. Some examples of mental health advocates are a family member who openly talks about their experience with mental health, a colleague that encourages their depressed peer to seek professional help and provide resources, and even a boss who understands and allows you to take leave because you are struggling with your emotional or mental well-being. Mental health advocates vary from person to person, but they are all making a difference in the current stigmas and barriers in their circles. And with that, I would like to briefly share about advocacy actions, some of which you've already heard of from my sharing earlier, or even before you came into this webinar. I'd like to take a moment to share about each action so that you would know more the further we proceed into your own journey of becoming a mental health advocate and using some of these actions yourself. Firstly, we have awareness raising, and this is any effort to share knowledge about mental health and stigmas to people around you. It could be through talking about a topic, reposting a post on Instagram to your followers, or even inviting a professional to give a webinar about mental health. Next, we have informing, where we do as much as possible to be aware of the stigmas and lack of knowledge around us and make it a point to inform others about services and resources as well. Educating is similar to training, but one is to teach and the other is to learn. Educating others is helpful, and I see a lot of youths nowadays embarking on this action through social media as well, sharing to their peers and their followers to educate about mental health symptoms and disorders. Training is to learn, and it is something that we all should do as well. There is always room for improvement in knowledge, so training can be a way to constantly increase our expertise on a topic. Next, we have mutual help, where it could describe a relationship between friends, between colleagues, or between leaders and employees as a way to ensure that we know enough to provide help when we can and to accept help as well. We also have counseling. And though it does mean it in the traditional sense of psychological counseling, it can also mean providing advice and support for advocacy too. The next three of mediating, defending, and denouncing are all related to stigma and standing up for someone else. With mediating, helping someone who seems to be in trouble with someone who is judgmental and prejudiced, with defending, to show support for the underprivileged, and with denouncing, to actively state the myths and truths you know about stigma in mental health. Among these actions, you may not remember all, but they will be scattered through the rest of the webinar in the different tips I share with you. It's not realistic that each of us do all of this at once, of course, but just know that even doing one helps, and it is enough as you start your journey. Now let's begin on how you can start your journey of becoming a mental health advocate. We will go through the 3 levels of advocacy together and explore how they apply to your lives and relationships, be it at home or at work. The innermost level is self-advocacy, followed by individual advocacy, and finally, systems advocacy. It's suggested that the changes we make as we embark on this journey follows the levels starting with self-advocacy. Now, self-advocacy is the action of addressing and changing your own beliefs and behaviors in order to better advocate for yourself and for others. Being more aware of your views and perspectives on mental health and the stigma surrounding it is super important, as we don't want to begin advocating while still holding unhelpful beliefs and stigma. Then we can explore your passion and start putting focus there, and finally discuss a bit about communication in self-advocacy. Starting with addressing your beliefs, I'd like to break it down to 3 categories of stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination. Stigma can come from any of these categories and can be further strengthened because of these beliefs. Stereotypes are beliefs about a category of people, and these usually exist as a fact that most people accept because it's been passed down through generations, or we hear it often enough to generalize it to that group of people. Some examples within the mental health population would be that suicidal people just want attention, and people with mental health disorders are just weaker, and maybe they are not religious enough. You may have heard that one before. Next, we have prejudice, which is a harmful opinion about a group of people that isn't based on reason or experience. This can sound like people with mental health disorders are dangerous and violent, and that mental health disorders are contagious. Prejudicial beliefs can then lead to the next step, which is discrimination, a negative treatment of others. This includes turning down a potential candidate for a job because the interviewer heard that they have a mental health disorder, and even a restaurant refusing to serve someone with a visible mental health issue like autism or Tourette syndrome because they both have motor and verbal tics. If you can see here, these 3 categories are on increasing levels of harm, but it still begins with a stereotype. Quashing stereotypes as early as possible can help to cut off the cycle before it becomes prejudice or discrimination. So what are your beliefs? Do you hold any stigma against people with mental health disorders? Would you be open to trying therapy or counseling? What pops into your mind when someone mentions therapy or depression or anxiety? How would you react if your friend or sibling told you they have depression? Would you dismiss it or listen, or would you judge them for it? What can you do to overcome these beliefs? Now, this is a question I can help you answer. The first step is definitely to acknowledge them and accept that you have these beliefs instead of denying them. Then you can actively do research to confirm or reject these beliefs you have. Knowledge is super helpful in addressing stereotypes and stigma, so just get to Googling about all these questions you may have. After that, actively reminding yourself that these thoughts are not true can lead to developing new, alternative, and healthier beliefs. Reframing your beliefs is the first step towards becoming a mental health advocate. Next, let's talk about your passion. This is not a necessary step for advocating for mental health, but it can help to motivate you to increase your efforts if you are fighting for something you truly care about. Some examples include accessible and affordable healthcare, sexual harassment in the workplace, decriminalization and prevention of suicide, childhood abuse, social anxiety among your colleagues or friends, learning disabilities in school to help your child, and so much more. And lastly, for self-advocacy, we've got to communicate. By this, I mean through your beliefs that you have reframed and the passion you have explored, start sharing about them. Advocate for yourself too. If anyone crosses your boundaries or judges you for being an advocate, by just standing up for yourself. Always be assertive and use assertive communication to share your views and opinions. Rather than using passive or aggressive or even passive aggressive communication, assertive communication is the healthiest way to acknowledge issues and share your opinions with others, as well as ask for change in their behavior or actions. All right. Once you're a bit more comfortable with self-advocacy, we move on to the next level of individual advocacy. In this level, the advocacy involves speaking up for an individual or a group of people who are considered marginalized or mistreated. Under this level, there are informal and formal advocacy. Informal advocacy is what you can do to communicate with or defend the people closest to you, or whoever's within your community, such as family, friends, partners, colleagues, and so on. Formal advocacy is when larger groups such as corporations and institutions, schools and universities introduce and provide resources for mental health and professional support, thereby removing a barrier to seeking help, as it is encouraged and even accessible. In this webinar, I'll share more about a handy guide to use informal advocacy in your daily life, so I won't be focusing too much on formal advocacy. So for informal advocacy, this is the CARE framework, and it serves as a guide to having open, non-judgmental, and empathetic communication with people around you. Basically, a step-by-step way to do informal advocacy to whoever needs it. The acronym stands for Check for Signals, Apply Non-Judgmental Conversation, Reassure Support with Information, and Ensure Help is Received. So let's start with Check for Signals. Firstly, before we even ask someone, how are you, we need to check for signals. Pay attention to noticeable changes in someone's behavior, especially if you are already aware that they may be going through a difficult period in their lives. Some examples are being late to work when they are usually on time, being more irritable and annoyed than usual, and choosing to isolate themselves and refuse social outings. Next, some of the key points to check is if this is affecting their daily functioning, as something may be making it difficult for them to cope. They may be missing deadlines, having difficulty sleeping and focusing, and missing appointments with friends or family. Lastly, the visible signs may be clearer if all else seems normal. Look for differences that point to sleep, appetite, and energy issues, such as dark eye bags, significant weight loss or weight gain, constantly crying or more emotional than before, and feeling tired often. So there's definitely room to know more about specific mental health symptoms for depression, anxiety, stress, mania, psychosis, and other mental health disorders. But you can still use the knowledge you currently have to gauge how serious these changes are by frequency, intensity, and duration. A rule of thumb for each of these points are if the behavior changes are happening more often than before, if you notice they are having difficulty functioning normally, and if the changes last for at least 2 weeks or worsen during this time. Knowing this, you can then decide on how you want to proceed in supporting them. All right, so once you see that there are signals that indicate someone is struggling emotionally or mentally, the next step is to approach in a non-judgmental and empathetic manner. Initiating the conversation using what you've observed can be helpful, but be careful not to phrase it in a way that blames them or judges them for it. Instead, let's take a look at these two options. That sounds painful. What can I do to help? Or, that's not so bad. You should just forget about it. Of course, the first one is ideal, as we want to show understanding, empathy, as well as openness to help, instead of dismissing their concerns, which pushes them further inward to struggle alone. So to do this, there are 3 ways of active listening, reflective speech, and showing empathy. Active listening involves showing that you are there and that you are paying attention using verbal signs like, I see, and nonverbal signs like nodding your head and showing reactive facial expressions. Remember that you are listening to support them, not to solve their problem. This helps you to pay attention and be mindful to the conversation instead of drawing your attention away to think about possible solutions. Next, with reflective speech, this is a way to show that you are listening well. Reflecting what they have shared is the easiest way. For example, when they say, I don't know what to do, I feel so tired, you can respond with, that sounds really tiring. And last but not least, show empathy. Empathy is the ability to feel what others feel. Even though you may not have experienced the same thing, you can try to feel the emotions and use that knowledge to comfort and console them. Do understand that they may have different needs too, so first ask them what they would like help. Next, if this person is open to it, reassure them that you can support them by using information. This can help them to trust you more and use the resources you provide. This is also why it is important to always learn more about mental health and how you can help. There are two ways: with knowledge and experience. For knowledge, you could share what you know about resources for professional help, coping skills, and interventions. And if you are aware that what they've shared with you is pointing to a severe mental health disorder, you can use this knowledge to address that and encourage seeking professional help too. You can also use experience by sharing your own journey of therapy or counseling, or acknowledging the similar struggles and that certain resources would be more helpful or not. And you could also help them seek help if you've already experienced it before yourself. Lastly, for the E in the CARE framework is to ensure help is received. Making sure that they have some form of informal or formal support is super important, especially if you realize that they are struggling with a mental health disorder. You can recommend and refer them to local crisis hotline numbers, therapy or counseling services, or even to the hospital for emergency care. Informally, you can help ensure that someone they live with or one of their family members is aware of what's happening by encouraging them to reach out to their emergency contact. Knowing more about your local psychological services and centers would be a great help to ensure that you can always be prepared to provide resources. So always remember that no matter who you are talking to, they have a choice. Always choose to prevent harm rather than to provide help, because they are able to make that choice themselves. The only time you can override this choice if you genuinely feel that they will harm themselves or someone else, or they will be harmed by someone else. All right, so from what we just shared, individual advocacy may take up most of your time, and there's nothing wrong with that. If any of you are interested to proceed to the next level of systems advocacy, there's definitely room for change in our country. Beyond the self and individual advocacy levels, putting in effort to change systemic stigma and barriers can help to change the mindset on mental health nationwide too. Systems advocacy is the act of changing policies and laws affecting mental health related issues on a local, state, or even a national level. As an individual who may not be involved in policy making, there are still actions you can take to support systems advocacy, such as joining and supporting campaigns that you are passionate about and raising awareness in your communities with your own advocacy actions. Signing a petition is always handy. Now, I'd like to ensure that each one of you is able to not only be a mental health advocate, but an even better mental health advocate at home and at work. Despite all the advocacy actions we just learned, it can be really overwhelming to actually do mental health advocacy. As you go about your journey, taking care of yourself is a must to ensure that you have enough time, energy, and motivation to continue being a mental health advocate. We start with our personal boundaries. Understanding your limits and ensuring that others are not taking advantage of you allows you to maintain control over your actions and your life. The 6 personal boundaries are mental, emotional, time, physical, material, and sexual boundaries, and all are important. I would like to share a bit more about the ones that are usually weaker, especially in the face of advocating for mental health and showing emotional support for others. Quite often, emotional and time boundaries are the weakest, as we become mental health advocates because there's an open flow of emotions by listening and conversing about others' struggles, and you may forego your time management to ensure that you help more people. Instead, think about your boundaries and limits as a water container. If you fill it up to a certain level, you may still be safe from spills, but the moment it is too full, the water spills very easily with any small movement. Be aware of how much emotional support you can give, and how much time you can spare for other people, and how much of these are still within your healthy range to avoid it spilling over when you go through a vulnerable moment. Once you strengthen your own boundaries, this gives you so much time and space to then do more of what matters to you instead of only prioritizing other people's needs. So once you've got your boundaries addressed, you now have time and energy to also do self-care. Taking care of yourself is the main resource to maintaining your mental health and well-being. There are a number of self-care dimensions, as you can see here, but you can start with the ones that are guaranteed to almost always lift your mood or lead to relaxation. These are your emotional and physical self-care, with activities like meditation, deep breathing, talking to a friend, going for counseling, exercising regularly, and eating healthy meals. Remember that when we used to go traveling on airplanes, there will always be a safety reminder to put the oxygen mask on yourself first, before helping others with theirs. The reason for this is because putting the mask on someone else first can lead to a lack of oxygen for yourself, and eventually you could pass out or worse. So helping yourself actually allows you to help other people better. And advocating for yourself first allows you to understand more about others and support them in advocacy even better. So, by taking care of yourself while being a mental health advocate, you are definitely on your way to become a better mental health advocate at home and at work. I hope that this sharing was beneficial for all of you and that you will start on your journeys as mental health advocates to influence change among your communities and lead to a larger nationwide community of mental health advocates. Thank you so much for your time and for listening.